From 1897 until its closure in 1962, the Grand Guignol Theatre became a staple in theater culture. The specialty of the house were short plays centered around themes of violence, crime, revenge, and explicit torture and graphic scenes. The overall aim of these shows was to shock the audience and challenge their core beliefs. Ultimately, these shows were created for the audience to want more and come back and pay that money. The theater started as a chapel built in the late 18th century, but it was short-lived due to a revolution and being assaulted by anti-clerical mobs during the 1791 Reign of Terror. Rage resulted in the chapel being gutted and converted for other purposes. In the first half of the 19th century, the venue was finally converted into a theater. This theater had more wholesome content, more traditional content, and it wasn't turned into the Grand Guignol until 1897, when it was purchased by Oscar Mettenaer. The name Grand Guignol translates roughly to the theater of the big puppet. Oscar focused his productions on real-life stories centering around war and other real-life occurrences. Oscar struggled to keep the theater open and eventually relinquished his ownership to a Max Marney. Marney made the Grand Guignol into the House of Horrors that is recognized by theater culture. Marney focused his plays on the underworld of Paris, crime, prostitution, overall shocking subjects for that day's topics. Also focused less on more natural stylistic choices, and in turn focusing on very gory, shocking styles that overemphasized the situations that the plays were going over. Marney was known to measure the success of his plays on the number of fainting audience members, and as a PR stunt, he hired a doctor to treat audience members who were overwhelmed during the plays. The more popular plays were the ones that he himself selected and edited to be featured along with like a body comedy every evening as a pair. This style of business allowed the Grand Guignol to continue very profitably for many years. Marney's partner, Andrew Delord, penned over 100 plays between 1901 and 1926. These plays were the main focus and the main production of the Grand Guignol for the 16 years that Marney was the owner until he retired. The venue of the theater was a very spooky place. The ambience and the atmosphere allowed audience members to fall into the sort of vibe that the plays would soon be giving. According to statements by audience members, the theater was still decorated like a chapel. The theater was a small, square, 7 by 7 meter space. Auditorium would sit about 100 seats arranged in 6 rows, and the stage was so close that the actors on stage could interact physically with the front row audience members. This intimacy with the audience allowed for the playwrights to integrate this connection into their plays with a sense of claustrophobia and being locked in a cell with these deranged people. Using this, most of the plays were set inside cramped environments, emphasizing a sense of dread and suffocation, such as bedrooms, opium dens, asylum cells, torture chambers, and operating rooms. Succeeding Maury were business partners Camille Choisy and Charles Zabel. These guys would bring upon the golden age of this theater. Most of the plays were still made by Delord. The star actress was a Paula Maxa, more commonly known as simply Maxa. During Maury's years, most of the characters were killed by simple methods of sword, dagger, or strangulation. However, the two new business partners and owners urged playwrights to come up with extremely graphic and disturbing ways of killing their characters. The use of more practical special effects was also used, such as Vaseline to replicate blood clumps and or skin, to even commissioning a local bakery to create edible body parts such as eyeballs to be eaten by actors on stage. The actress Maxa was a very prominent figure in the theater, and she would go on to die some 10,000 times in over 60 different ways during her career at the theater. Sadly, after the horrors of World War I and World War II, audiences didn't seem to want to watch violent depictions of death and torture, and this ultimately led to the theater closing down in 1962 with the final sale of all props and scenery in 1963. This style of media is still prevalent today in horror movies such as Hostel and the Saw franchises. Even revival groups such as the Molotov Theater Group in Washington, D.C.